Welcome to the show. Today we are going to be talking about another recovery concept that really helped us when we were going through our story and learning concepts that allowed us to have language to work with each other through recovery. So today we're going to talk to you guys about the elephant and the rider. And this was a concept that really helped us to make sense of this cycle that we would get stuck in. You guys probably know what I'm talking about. If you've ever been in any kind of a relationship, there's some sort of like crazy cycle that you can get stuck in where all of a sudden things are just like spiraling and going downhill. And for us in our marriage, that happened. And then all of a sudden, Peter would act out. And it was like this pattern that we would get stuck in. And for me as the wife, not understanding, it was really easy for me to be like, why can't you just get it together? Right? Like, why does this keep happening? But there was a reason why, and it had nothing to do with, oh, he can't just get it together. He doesn't have willpower. Like there's an actual thing that happens in your brain. And so today we're going to talk about that because it's not just true for men struggling with an addiction. It's true for all of us. We all get stuck in this cycle where all of a sudden you have that last straw moment where you're like, oh my gosh, that is the last straw. I'm now losing it. I'm yelling at my kids. I'm like, I personally turn into the white tornado. I don't know. That's what Peter calls me. And it's like, get out of my way because I'm getting all of this to happen for me. And if you get in my way, you're probably going to lose your head type thing.
I wanted to say two things about that. Number one, it's not just recovery.
Yeah.
It's not just going through addiction. It can be understanding any area of your life, any critical area of your life that's important to you.
Yeah.
It's also, and this was a huge bombshell moment for me just recently in the last few weeks, it's not just how it works in a relationship, how it works interpersonally. Sometimes it's the relationship inside of yourself and how you treat yourself inside. And that was a huge revelation for me in kind of understanding and that starting with that metaphor, the elephant and the rider, and how that plays out in our life. So we jump in?
Yeah, let's jump in.
So picture an elephant. Elephant is several thousand pounds, and it's incredibly powerful. And let's picture the rider on top. Now, let's say that's a guy, a couple 100 pounds, who with a gentle bump of the elephant or some other cue can make this gigantic beast do
whatever he wants.
So the elephant's walking along on the trail. It's hauling, huge things, whatever. And with just a few short little tweaks, they can control the elephant. Mm-hmm. And all that's fine and dandy until something spooks the elephant. But before we get there, the metaphor is important because the elephant is the emotional you.
It's your emotional brain. Or another reference for this would be the passengers on your bus. And that's a previous episode that I did. You can go back and listen to that if you don't know what I'm talking about.
So this makes sense, particularly those of us who are parents. Your kids who are 3, 4, 5, 6, they're just going to respond straight out of emotions.
Yeah.
A lot of times they don't have that frame of reference on top to check themselves.
Well, your logical brain doesn't actually start developing until you're 7, and it doesn't finish till about 25.
So the emotional brain is
driving the bus.
You every step of the way as you're growing up. And the rational brain, the rational you, starts coming in and gradually figuring things out. So a quick example of that is you could figure out if it was a fair situation between you and your sibling about you playing with the toys or anything like that long before you knew how to do calculus.
Correct.
Or anything like that. So emotional you is the elephant. The rational you is the rider on top. Usually we're going to go through life and we can control our emotions. Mm-hmm. We can tell them what to do. So we can have a pretty good relationship with ourselves, go to work, get stuff done, do all these different things. But it's sort of like this amount of pressure gets built up, and the elephant at some point can get spooked. And so that's where, for us, that's like the straw that broke the camel's back. It's not just one thing that made you completely go over the top and lose it, but it's typically this thing that builds up over a period of time.
Well, and it's not even necessarily the elephant getting spooked. It might also be how well have you taken care of the elephant, right? Most of us were taught, like, just stuff your emotions, like, don't process them, don't deal with them, like, don't show that. And that's constantly the rider, like, whipping the elephant back into, like, submission, right? Being like, okay, just keep working, just keep working, just keep working, and never taking time to feed your elephant, water your elephant, like, let it sleep. Like, if you think about it, your subconscious mind, which is also your emotional brain, never, ever takes a break. It's always on for you.
And so some examples that where that showed up in my life were big boys don't cry. You can't express that emotion. Get that look off your face. Why are you throwing a fit right now? Why are you upset? And so I don't know exactly how that showed up in your life as a little girl, but I'm sure there's some parallels there.
I mean, I was told to control my tears. I was told to stop crying too.
Did that work, or did that make them more?
Yeah, that made it worse, actually.
And a lot of times where we figure out going through life is we figure out this survival mechanism. We figure out this mask that we can put on to mask our emotions and mask what's going on inside. And that's going to typically show up one of three ways. We're either going to become a victim, we're going to either become a persecutor, or we're either going to become a rescuer. And we'll explain those three concepts a little later on in this episode. But that survival mechanism is the little person that you were gradually figuring out along the way how to protect themselves. Remember that guard dog analogy. The guard dog is protecting the perimeter,
right,
and making sure that you're taken care of. Now, you're just figuring that out as you go. You're not consciously thinking, do this, do that, do the other thing. That's the rational you. The emotional you is figuring out this protection mechanism around it to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Not all bad, but that's just kind of how it works in life.
And that you're not hurt. So it's slowly just putting up walls. And the whole guard dog analogy is what we talked about before on a previous episode. So you can go back and listen to that too.
So back to the elephant and the rider. If there's a disagreement between the elephant and the rider, guess who wins? The elephant, every single time. So if
He's a lot bigger.
If you haven't been taking care of your elephant, if you haven't been doing the steps along the way that you know you need to take care of, the elephant's going to go off the rails. If the elephant's been spooked, it's going to go off the rails and maybe wipe out a whole village and go on a rampage. So that's where in our lives, people used a trash can analogy or kettle on the stove analogy or some other type of example to illustrate how the emotional side of you starts heating up. And we talked about indicators, I think, in the past. There's little red flags that go up in your life to illustrate, I'm not doing okay.
Right. We all know what those are. We all start getting a shorter fuse. Maybe we're a little more tired and we're snappy. Like, those are it for me, where I'm like, just a short fuse and like I snap at everything. Those are my red flags, to be like, oh, whoa, slow down. Like, what's going on inside of you right now?
Some of the red flags for me are, am I taking care of myself? Am I taking time off? Is there some white space in my calendar? Newsflash, if you look at your schedule and you don't have a break that's built in where you have, and you can look forward to something fun, something engaging, something relationally building. If you don't have that break in your calendar where it's either something awesome or just time off, a break, nothing, your brain's going to take it. And you don't exactly know when your brain is going to take it. Back to the emotional you. If the rational you is pushing so hard and whipping the elephant into submission, at some point in time, the elephant's going to say, enough.
Yeah. And then I would say in therapy for us, we learned how to take care of the elephant by giving space for emotions. But now with coaching, what I've learned and what I now get to help people learn is it's not just expressing emotions because, okay, every time now we're going to pull over and acknowledge the elephant's emotions, but we're still going to stay in that same pattern, right? Mm-hmm. So with coaching, it's now learning how to teach your elephant a new thought pattern, like a new way of reframing things so that they're not constantly getting stuck in this same thought pattern, which leads to this same emotion, which leads to this same outburst. You can actually reframe all of that and actually help your elephant, your emotional brain, learn how to process things differently.
So in a relationship, like with us, there's this intricate dance that we figure out how to go through life. And when we first meet, there's that huge attraction. And then very similar to as a little kid, gradually figuring out how to process their emotions.
Yeah.
In a relationship, that process happens all over again. We learn how to have this dance in between ourselves. So we're going to learn very quickly in a very subconscious way, and back to our emotional brain, how to respond and how to process. When you do this, I do that.
Yeah.
And when I do this, you know that, and you do the other thing.
That goes back to the cog in the wheel thing that we talked about on here earlier. I'm laughing at the fact that you can hear our kids downstairs, like losing it. I'm not laughing at you.
Their elephants are going off the rails.
Okay, so then how does this practically apply? Let's dive into like the victim persecutor thing and then action steps.
So I think we have a misconception about what a victim is. And in our society, oh, you're being a victim. And I don't want to be a victim here. Like a lot of times that has a real negative connotation. And I just want to flush something out. Some language that one of my coaches gave me was really, really critical. A victim is someone whose dream or the desire of their heart has been thwarted. And that can apply to anybody. Yeah. So your dream has been thwarted. Something important to you got broken. And that's very empowering language. Kind of understand, it's not you're being a victim here. It's very easy to understand. So perhaps it's the goal and the desire of your marriage blew up.
Totally.
And now the dream that you had isn't there anymore.
Yep.
Or maybe just in a very simple, practical way, you had a desire for what your day was going to look like, and something completely came in and wiped that out.
Yeah. That happens a lot.
Really?
Kids, who knew?
And that's where, being a victim is very easy to fall into that trap. Again, it's part of your survival mechanism.
Yeah.
So things like if you find yourself thinking or expressing, whether it's self-talk or talking and expressing this verbally, I can just never win, or I can never get this right, or why is everything against me? Why did this get broken again? I remember my dad and my mom sometimes would use the victim way as a way to control us as kids.
Oh, totally.
And it's sort of a shame thing about, you don't value your parents, or are you trying to fill in the blank?
I think we have done this to our kids too before.
We have.
Not just our parents have done this, so we've done this too.
It's easiest to see it in somebody else.
Totally.
In other situations. And then sometimes you need a mirror or an outside perspective to look back at yourself and say, oh, yep, that guy. I was doing it too. So victim is someone whose dream or desire has been thwarted.
Yeah.
Persecutor is
slash
judge is another role. And you might even think about it as a triangle: victim, persecutor, rescuer. So a persecutor is either I'm going to lash out at you or you're going to lash out at me. Sometimes persecution is outwards. And oftentimes the biggest voice of persecution, or the persecutor, is to ourselves. I'll say things to myself with my self-talk, so brutal, so scorched earth strategy that I would never imagine to say to somebody else.
Yeah.
But I say it to myself all the time.
A really helpful question with this, and I ask this to my clients all the time, when I hear them say certain things that are not loving towards themselves.
Very disempowering.
Disempowering. I will ask them, whose voice is that? And it's easy to say, oh, that's my dad or that's my mom. But in reality, it's not. It's yours, but it's a past you. It's a past you, like your past passengers on the bus. And usually happened because someone else spoke that over you, but then you took that on. And now you speak that over yourself. And so that's a great question to ask yourself to start identifying when this first started happening, and then really digging into questioning, is this true? Is this giving me the future I want? Because remember, we talked about it's always benefiting you somehow. So it's not a question of, is this serving me? It is. It's more like how. How is this serving you? And is it creating the future you want? That's a quick side note.
So examples of that in our lives might be, I'll be sitting there and tell myself, and just hear the love here. I suck at empathy. I can never get this right. I am a pathetic loser. I don't know what to do in the situation. Or sometimes it's a harsh critical voice or a harsh critical tone outwards to somebody else.
Yeah.
You just blank, fill in the blank. Mm-hmm. You can never blah, 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 blah. That persecutor role is very easy to fall into. And just like you said a moment ago, it's somebody else's voice that you heard in your past, perhaps. And then you took that on and you made that part of you. Correct. And so with that self-protection mechanism that is this bubble that we have the guard dog pacing around outside of our lives, the real unfortunate pattern, and this is actually where the protection mechanism, the survival mechanism really falls apart, is that voice of that persecutor is actually in a sick, thwarted way looking to make itself right, make it a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
So for example, if you can't get off the couch one day and you're really struggling, and then you tell yourself, you pathetic blank, why can't you get this right? What's wrong with you? Get your big girl pants on, big boy pants on, and go to work. What the heck? In a really backwards way, it's actually looking to prove that it's correct. And a final capstone or tombstone on that might be your relationship blew up. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, see, I was right. I was a pathetic loser. I was a fill in the blank. And so that persecutor voice and that victim voice, oftentimes we bounce back and forth between those two. And so I'll be, in my head, I'll be the victim. I'll be saying all this victim language that's disempowering. And then I'll turn around and be the persecutor. And sometimes I'm bouncing back and forth between those two conversations with my self-talk.
And then when we want to analyze it, we just blame our parents, which, while there's validity there, is not empowering to you, because in reality, it's not your parents anymore. It's you. And you get to change, which is super cool.
Or blame a situation in your past, or blame a really traumatic situation that's happening to you right now.
That's not...
We all have terrible things that happen to us. We all have things that either come out of left field, we never saw that happening. Again, dreams been thwarted. Your victim is sometimes right, but it's not empowering.
And the road to freedom is always taking 100% responsibility, even for things other people have done to you. It's taking 100% responsibility. And the question always is, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? And you're not going to be happy as long as you're pointing the finger at other people.
Yeah. So like in our recovery story and in our recovery journey, it was very easy for me at the start to get worked up about, well, all these things happened in my past. Mm-hmm. And my dad did this, and my mom did this, and she went to law school, and it was never there for me. And I have mommy wounds and daddy wounds, and that's why I'm blah, 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 blah. And along the way, I figured out a way to cope with those, and it turned into an addiction. And that's disempowering. That leaves me stuck.
Yeah.
That might be part of it, is understanding what happened in our past, that little red dot on the map, you are here.
For sure.
But you don't want to stay at that little red dot because that's going to leave you being a victim or the voice of a persecutor. You're in the crap.
It'll leave you in your pattern. And then all you're stuck doing is managing behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you want to be able to actually change and find freedom and healing, you got to go deeper than that.
So the protection mechanism, the survival mechanism, that guard dog that's circling the perimeter, the hardest role I've found to understand is the role of the rescuer. But this was actually a huge light bulb moment for me this last week. It sounds noble. It really sounds like I'm doing something really, really awesome. But it's actually plays into that whole triangle, if you will. So here goes. This past week was Easter, and we had breakfast being delivered. One of our special restaurants. We couldn't go out to eat there Sunday morning, so we had breakfast delivered. And I was doing the dishes and was working on those for a while. I actually figured out it's very easy to fall into the victim route because when I'm doing the dishes or other household chores, because that was my past. I had to do that for a family of 13 by hand every day. And so then as a kid, I had all this victim self-talk going along. A lot of it was true. Couldn't go outside and play, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm sitting there and I was already teetering on the brink of victim self-talk, and this delicious food shows up. And my self-talk at that point in time was, you know what, I want to make sure that Joy gets exactly what she wants, and Simon's going to get what he wants, and Scarlett gets what she wants, and I'll just take what's left. I'll just take the leftovers. And maybe that shows up in your life like, you know what, I don't really care where we got to eat. I don't care what we do tonight. I don't care whatever. Like you just decide, and I'll just go along with it. Mm-hmm. It's an inappropriate rescuer where it actually can really sound or come across as enabling. Let's say your kids are struggling with their homework. Mommy will just do that. Maybe something's going on where you need to step in and intervene, say at school or in some other situation, but you can, quote unquote, be the hero and rescue. And unfortunately, that's not how we can learn to grow up. That's very disempowering because that can very easily lead back to the victim. It's a big surprise. Our kids didn't enjoy the breakfast. They're fighting over it. And now I'm going, I gave them first dibs. They don't value me. They don't value that. They're fighting over the food. They didn't even enjoy it in the first place. Blah, 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 blah. So
then he's like faulting us since we didn't recognize him as the hero. And see how we do this literally to ourselves. And then people are like, what? Like, what did I do that's wrong? But we're the ones that created the whole scenario in the first place.
And it's easy to toggle back and forth between victim and persecutor and victim and rescuer and persecutor. And those roles can very easily play out in your life. And that's just part of your survival mechanism that you figured out. I think we all have a flavor of all three of those in our lives and also in our marriage.
Yeah.
Or other relationships. You might tend towards more the victim or more the persecutor or more the rescuer, but those are all part of the survival mechanism trying to medicate and deal with the problem. So where do you go with this?
Good question.
For starters, it starts with step one is acknowledging and figuring out this is where I'm at. And it might take days or weeks to figure that out sometimes. Sometimes those initial fights or disagreements that we had ruined a whole weekend or something crazy happened. And then one of us caves in, one of us says, I'm sorry. And sometimes that's still the survival mechanism going on.
Right.
That might be the rescuer saying, you know what, you're totally right and I'm wrong and I'm going to whatever. And then it's easy to go in the self-talk, I'm a victim here or whatever.
Right.
But that's disempowering. That's not the dream that you want to have for your life. That's not where you want to stay.
Yeah. Or for your marriage either.
So in your life, in your business, in your relationships, how do you want that to actually what do you want to have happen? What's the dream that you want to have is really goes to the step 2. What do you want to create? Where do you want to take your life and your marriage? Do you want to stay in this disempowered place?
Right.
Or do you want to go somewhere new? So back to that elephant and the rider analogy. For starters, we do have to acknowledge and honor the elephant.
Yeah.
We do need to figure out some things along the way, like why did we go off the rails here and suddenly there's this huge blow up? So we need to figure that out. But then the rational us needs to be able to figure it out quicker.
Well, I would say you start with first recognizing when your elephant's getting out of control, your red flags, when your emotions are taking over. And instead of just sitting down and saying, oh, this happened when I was a kid, it's my parents' fault, it's whose voice is this? And identifying that past passenger on your bus. What age were you? And what did that person, that version of you need? And how can you give that to them now?
Yeah.
And then 2, going down the road of coaching yourself or hiring a coach. I know a great one. Of saying, like, is this actually true? And what would be a more empowering thought? Like, how could I actually reframe this situation? I've talked about the 7-step process before, somewhat, in an episode called Agreements. You can go listen to that. It might help you in coaching yourself through reframing situations where you feel hurt by somebody else. And then we'll do a more in-depth one on that coming up too.
Something that was really helpful for me was part of that recognizing step is what sensation am I feeling in my body where? So do I have this tightness in my temples or my forehead? Do I have this tightness in my chest or a pain in my gut?
Yeah.
Are my fingers sore because I've been kind of clenching or, different things like that? A lot of times we're going to express what's going on inside outwardly some external way. And that's a way to figure out, oh, I'm doing it again. And that was a survival mechanism that I invented as a little person. And now I'm still doing it later on in life. Something else that was really helpful for me is to put in some humor there. If I can laugh about it, if I can say, you know what, it's okay, and chuckle that, you know what, oh my gosh, I'm showing up that way as a rescuer about Easter breakfast. You know what, that's kind of funny. And then that's actually a way to let myself off the hook in a healthy way. I don't need to keep whipping the elephant.
Right.
And then I can say, what do I really want in my life? How do I want to take this to the next step, which is not just identifying, but then what's that dream that I want to create in my life for my future?
And then the last question I would say that's really great for dissecting this and getting yourself to a more empowering place is saying, what would it look like for me to take 100% responsibility for this entire situation? Even my thoughts and my feelings. And just what would it look like? And let your brain just kind of see. Be curious about it.
How would that play into like our story on the recovery journey? Because that's how we started the episode.
Totally. Well, knowing what I know now, what it would look like for me taking 100% responsibility in that situation was owning the fact that your choices did not have to affect my emotions. Like owning the fact that we were 2 separate people and that your choices, I could still have a boundary and there could be consequences, but recognizing that they were a reflection on him and that they had nothing to do with me and that was his crap and I could let him figure it out and I didn't even have to really be affected. Like, yeah, I could still draw a line. I could still be like, we're not, we're separated right now. Like, we're not interacting right now. But going through my own self-talk and my own emotions and not letting myself go into that spin and that cycle of how could this happen to me? How could he do this to me? What does this mean about me? What are other people going to think? Like, that was all me. Mm-hmm. That was not anybody else. That was all me putting that on myself and then causing my own inner turmoil. And that was also tapping a huge wound that was already there. And so I could have been doing the work on myself to go back and say, what passenger is this? Where did this come from? Like, what did that person need? And giving myself that love and that comfort that I needed, instead of just being like, where's everybody else to do this for me? Why is nobody showing up?
In a recovery scenario, or couples working through addiction or things like that, it's easy for one individual in that to be a victim.
Totally.
Where it's, I can never change. I'm stuck. This is just how I'm wired, or whatever. Or the other person to be the victim of, I got stuck in this relationship, or stuck in this marriage, or stuck somewhere, and now I'm just going to have to live with this the rest of my life, or whatever. In our story, when I was going through my addiction and addictive tendencies, it was actually, looking back on it, easy to see where in some ways you were tempted to be the rescuer. You were tempted to do all the right things and make sure that Peter is okay and all these different things, or show up perhaps as the persecutor. What's wrong with you?
Right.
How could you do this? How dare you? Blah, blah,
Correct.
blah, blah. And so sometimes identifying those different roles, and lots of times what's helpful is to actually have a meta conversation, kind of step back and push pause and say, what's going on here? I'm doing it again. That self-awareness step, and being able to, instead of being stuck in those very raw details and that raw conversation, kind of step back and say, what's really going on behind the surface?
So that's all we've got for you guys today. I hope this was helpful for you in starting to identify your own patterns, but also in your relationship, identifying those patterns there. We'll see you guys next time.